The United States of America, the world's largest debtor nation of all time, well, we've just surpassed $22 trillion dollars on our national debt. Is it the end of the world? What does it mean for the dollar? Are we going to see hyperinflation? Can it ever be paid off? Well, we're going to talk about those things and more. Hey everybody, my name is Jason. You're watching Bull Boom Bear Bust. Thank you for joining me. So let's start off at the U.S. debt clock here. And this is going to give us a few different things to look at. Of course, there's the national debt right there in the upper left, 22 trillion. Okay, so first of all, many so-called conservatives that voted for the current administration, for the current president, and historically conservatives have stated that their platform is for less spending, right? But we know that's all a joke. That's the whole thing is just a political ploy as far as the whole label being a conservative. We know it's a very false label, right? So the whole left versus right thing, I see that as mostly a fight for power because we know that both sides have their flaws, right? We know the left, they say they stand for tolerance, but yet they want to attack people verbally, assault people. They want to shut down free speech. And then we see the right, they typically call themselves conservatives in many cases. And we see them as some of the biggest spenders. Now, is the current administration spending at the fastest pace ever? Well, no, not exactly. It is the fastest, though, since 2012. Okay, back in the middle of Obama's era there. So the total public debt outstanding has jumped by 1.36 trillion, which is about 6.6% since the start of 2018, and that's nearly 2 trillion since Trump took office. Okay, and that's according to the latest Treasury Department figures. Okay, the latter of that figure, the nearly 2 trillion, to put that into perspective, is basically roughly the size of Brazil's gross domestic product. Okay, so the pace of debt that we're accumulating matches the entire GDP for certain countries. Okay, now if this current growth rate of debt is sustained through the end of this year, 2019, it would be the biggest jump in percentage terms since the last year of President Obama's first term. So the borrowing is needed to cover a budget deficit that expanded by about $779 billion in Trump's first fiscal year as president, and that was the widest fiscal gap in 6 years. On this pace, by the end of Trump's first term, the debt is expected to rise by $4.4 trillion, and this comes despite historically low unemployment and relatively low interest rates and significant job growth. Now, we know that the job growth is really tied with stagnant wages, so they're not great jobs that people are seeing. A lot of service sector jobs, unfortunately. Okay, can this ever be paid off? Well, the answer is no. Unfortunately, this is going to lead to a default eventually, or a reset of the entire economic system. And I say unfortunately, well, in many ways, depends on how you look at it. It could be fortunately, we'll get out of this debt if somehow we can ditch this entire central banking system. Now, I know to some that may seem impossible. That's never going to happen. But we're going to talk about here in a future video how there's some things on the table as far as possibly auditing and actually abolishment bills that are actually being looked at right now in the government. Okay, so here's the national debt, okay, over 22 trillion as we talked about. Here is the tax revenue. The tax revenue that we're seeing barely matches the interest that we are paying on the debt here, right? So we see $3 trillion in interest now that we owe to the private Western Central Bank that creates our currency, that digitizes the money, and basically creates ones and zeros out of thin air, right? So they do nothing to work for the money. They have not been audited. Okay, basically up until now, they've been above the law, and I say up until now, they're still above the law. But it looks like the current president may have some control over the Fed. And then some people say, well, if you just raise the taxes to 60, 70, 80%, that'll eventually pay off the debt. But think about what would happen to the economy if that happened, right? So if everybody had to pay 60, 70, 80% of their paycheck to the government, well, that would also cause an economic catastrophe because no one would be able to afford basic necessities like food, automobiles, and even housing. Okay, now as far as total tax revenue, that's what you see right here, right in the $3 trillion range. But when it just comes to income taxes, we have to go to the right here. We see income tax revenue is only at about $1.7 trillion right now. So when you think about trying to pay off the national debt, with just income taxes. Well, you have to look at the 1.7 trillion and then look at our interest, what we're paying now. It's over $3 trillion we paid in interest. So considering that we'll never be able to even pay off the interest, that should tell you then what's going to eventually happen to the principal. The principal is likely never going to get touched. Okay, unless we cut spending. Okay, now the current administration, they've been talking about bringing troops home, ending some of these never-ending wars. Okay, cutting a lot of the federal government jobs. Okay, which would also cause a lot of pain in the economy because that's going to be less spending and likely leading to many of these federal employees to lose their homes. And we saw during the government shutdown evidence of that where people had to get assistance even with their cell phone bills and of course their mortgage payments. Okay, so will this destroy the dollar? Well, that depends, and there's no way to give you a definite answer because we have a group there called the Fed that dictates the direction of the economy and therefore the fate of the dollar. And even seasoned economists, people that have been doing this for decades, including people like Peter Schiff, he says, on one hand, he says that there's going to be a major crash in home prices, and we had a video here on this channel where he spoke about the possibility of home prices diving in some areas of 60 and 70%. But he said that could happen if the Fed aggressively raises interest rates, right? So even economists at this point have no clue. They're just guessing. They're going to be using a lot of ifs and ands or buts in their answers, in their analysis of the economy. Okay, now the opposite is true. If the Fed cuts rates, this could very easily lead us into hyperinflation and a acceleration in the destruction of the dollar. Okay, now will it hyperinflate like Venezuela? Well, it's likely not going to be that rapid and that drastic. Eventually it could, but I don't think it'll happen that rapidly because we still do have the world's reserve currency. Okay, but if you look around, a lot of countries are dumping the dollar, right? So this world currency reserve status is another temporary situation that I think people should be very careful about. Okay, so let's go over to ccn.com, not CNN, but ccn.com. And we're going to have links to all these down in the description. Just go down to our homepage link. That's going to take you to all these news articles that we're looking at today. Okay, but let's look back historically and see how debt has increased, the national debt, under different presidents. We have Bush #1, we have Clinton in the 90s, and then we have George Bush. And what's interesting here, we see his first year, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But in 2008, the last year for Bush, we saw the biggest jump in national debt, and we know that was the year of the financial crisis and the bailouts. Right, so just looking at the trend line here, we see a major increase in debt with the steepening here of this curve, and then that continued under Obama, and it started to level out here, and then of course the last few years increased heavily again. Okay, now the chart actually doesn't go to the 22 trillion that we're currently seeing, but just to kind of give you perspective on it, okay, based off this 22.5 trillion up here, we're right about here after 2 years of Trump. So not slowing down, still one of the biggest increases in debt that we've ever seen. Okay, now remember the debt essentially doubled under Obama, and when you go over to Trump, he inherited the debt basically at about 20 trillion. So from a percentage standpoint, for Trump to be as bad as Obama, he would have to double the 20 trillion, which would put it to 40 trillion, right? He's not on pace to do that. Okay, I don't really think that's a very good way to look at the debt as just a percentage increase. I think you should still look at the total dollars. Okay, so where does this lead to us, in my opinion? Well, I think you need to be on the defensive, right? I would advise, and I'm not giving financial advice here, so I shouldn't use the word advise, but what I'm doing is I'm being cautious and I'm putting some of my assets, some of my cash in different places besides the bank. Okay, I keep about enough in my bank to pay bills. Okay, but banks, they don't have to give you your money thanks to the Frank-Dodd Act in 2010 where bail-ins are now possible instead of bailouts. Okay, and we're going to talk about the possibility of bail-ins in a future video. But yes, it is fully legal in certain situations for banks to take your money. And it's already been done in places like Cyprus and others. So it's definitely not impossible. And it's actually part of that bill that we'll talk about. Okay, so I've said this before. I do invest in cryptocurrencies. Okay, it's not a large part of my holdings, but I do have about between 5 and 10% now. I'd say about 10% is what ultimately I'll grab up here in currencies, cryptocurrencies. Okay, I also am in some precious metals, especially silver, and I'm talking about physical silver in a safe. And I prefer silver bars that are stamped with the fact that they are nearly pure silver. That way, when it comes time to trade or barter or sell these, the person that you're dealing with or the person you're trying to sell these to or trade with, they're not going to question so much the fact that it is real silver. Whereas older coins, people may question, well, are these the silver coins? Are these the half silver coins? Okay, again, another topic for a different video. Okay, but if we do see a destruction of the dollar and hyperinflation, you want to have something to hyperinflate. Maybe it's land, maybe it's property, maybe it's your home. And before investing in these things, it's probably a good idea to try to get out of debt first, right? Because if you're paying 10, 15, 20% on a subprime car loan or even a credit card, well, that's really going to eat up a lot of the increases that you may see in assets that do appreciate, okay, during these possible inflationary times. Right? So it's no joke and it's no mystery that to a lot of people that are paying attention that the economy is at a very critical time right now. We're at the end of about a 10-year expansion, a 10-year bull market growth period. Okay, one of the longest expansions of all time. Okay, but it's also put us under the most debt we've ever seen. So basically it's uncharted territory. So if anybody tells you exactly what's going to happen, you might want to question them and try to use your own judgment on all this. Because again, we're in uncharted territory. We've never had these levels of debt. We've never come off such a long extended period of ultra low interest rates. And we're seeing everything, every type of debt you can imagine at all-time highs. Everything from, of course, the national debt, which we spoke about here, from individual household debt, corporate debt. Okay, so back to the cryptocurrencies for a minute here. People say, well, cryptocurrency, that's also fiat, just like the dollar, because nothing's backing it. Well, much like the dollar, it is backed by faith and confidence. And you could say it's not backed by the government, but some people look at that as a more positive thing. Okay, but they're not creating unlimited amounts of Bitcoin, right? There's a limited amount. And you have to look into each cryptocurrency, by the way, to see the type of structure that's set up. Right? So when it comes to the next recession, and it will happen, and it's going to be much more difficult to pay back the debt, and they're less likely to support struggling institutions through bailouts like they did in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. So they will likely be forced to force the Federal Reserve to print more dollars. Okay, this is going to push down purchasing power and again possibly lead to hyperinflation. And what that may do, that may cause a panic out of the dollar, right? So people just want to get out of the dollar. And when that happens, guess what? You're going to see precious metals likely rocket upward. And the people that don't have access to finding precious metals, because it's going to become very hard to find, well, they're likely going to put it in the next best thing, and maybe not even the best thing, may be the best thing because the easiness of transferring from a fiat currency and digital currency into cryptocurrencies. Okay, but there's also risks there because there was a case where an entire group of investors lost everything because the creator of this cryptocurrency, I can't remember which one it was, but a creator of a cryptocurrency actually passed away, and there ended up being some password or some code that went along with him, and that made essentially all of these investors, all of their holdings in this cryptocurrency unaccessible. Right? So everything has risks, including the dollar, even precious metals. Precious metals, good luck if you have to bug out or travel somewhere. Good luck trying to get across the border or get on an airplane or get pulled over by a crooked cop, and good luck not getting your precious metal taken away from you. Right, I can see it now. The cop's looking through my car. Well, son, where'd you get all this silver at? This looks pretty suspicious. I think we better confiscate this. Yeah, we'll go ahead and take that now. Here's your court date. Why do you need so much silver? Why don't you just use dollars? Are you some type of terrorist? Right, so everything has risk. Cryptos, the dollar, okay, precious metals. That's why I say don't put all your eggs in one basket. Look at it like insurance, right? Have you ever bought car insurance? Have you ever bought home insurance? Okay, hopefully you pay for it and never need to use it, but if you do need to use it, it's there. And that's where I look at trying to diversify and being defensive in these times with uncontrolled debt creation via the central bank. All right, everybody, thanks for watching. Please let me know what you think down in the comments. Let me know what you're doing, what you think about what we talked about here, what I might have missed. I know there's 100 different directions I could have went on this, but I try to keep the videos about 10 or 12 minutes at the most, so I know I went over that time, looks like. Also, if you'd like to support the channel, of course, watching supports it, sharing and liking the videos helps. We have a link down there in the description to PayPal if you'd like to throw us $1 or whatever you think is worth the information that we give out. Thanks, everybody, and hope to see you here next time. Bye.